Hi, and welcome to That's Ruddy Mysterious, a podcast of short tales about true mysteries. What happened to the Flannan Isles Lightkeepers? Who was responsible for the Gardner Museum heist? I'm not going to solve those mysteries, but they'll be interesting to learn about. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. Transcripts for all episodes can be found at that'sruddymysterious.wordpress.com. No apostrophe and no exclamation point. Today's tale is about Felix Moncla and the Kinross incident. On November 23, 1953, a little after 11 p.m., Air Defense Command Ground Intercept in Sault Ste. Marie, Michigan, saw an object on their radar that they could not explain. The object was over Lake Superior near the Sioux Locks. The Sioux Locks were under control of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers and were heavily protected, so an F-89C Scorpion Jet, piloted by First Lieutenant Felix Moncla Jr., was scrambled to intercept the object. Ground radar operators watched in horror as Moncla intercepted the object, merging with it on their screen, and then simply disappeared. Felix Moncla Jr. was born in Mansura, Louisiana on October 21, 1926. He was presumed dead on November 23, 1953. Felix spent much of his life serving in the U.S. military. He served in the U.S. Army during World War II. After his service ended, he left the Army and went to the University of New Orleans, only to re-enlist in the military in 1950 at the start of the Korean War. This time, he entered the U.S. Air Force. Moncla began his service in the Air Force as an officer pilot trainee and began with a desk job. After a few months, he was sent to Connally Air Force Base in Waco, Texas for pilot training. He received further pilot training at Reese Air Force Base and Tyndall Air Force Base. In 1952, Moncla moved to Madison, Wisconsin. As of the night of his disappearance, Moncla had logged a total of 811 hours flying, with over 121 hours on the F-89 type aircraft, which he flew the night of his disappearance. The night of November 23, 1953, was a stormy night with low visibility. Ground control noticed a strange target near the Sioux Locks traveling at 500 miles per hour. Felix Moncla was scrambled in his F-89C Scorpion Jet with 2nd Lieutenant Robert L. Wilson as radar operator to investigate. Wilson had 206 hours of experience, with more than 11 of those hours at night. However, Wilson was having trouble tracking the target because it kept changing course. A ground control operator guided the pair to the target. At first, Moncla was flying at 25,000 feet altitude, and the ground control operator had to guide them down to 7,000 feet altitude. About 70 miles offshore of Keweenaw Point in Upper Michigan, Moncla caught up to the target while flying at 8,000 feet altitude. They were about 160 miles northwest of the Sioux Locks. That's when the two radar blips became one blip on ground control's screen. David Kehoe, former Marine Corps aviator and U.S. researcher, has written about the Kinross incident twice. First, in 1955, he wrote The Flying Saucer Conspiracy, and then in 1973, he wrote Aliens from Space. He discussed the Kinross incident in both books. He described the two blips as being locked together. After locking together, Kehoe explained the F-89 disappeared from the GCI, Ground Control Interception, station's radar scope. A 1993 Freedom of Information Act request revealed some more information about the incident, although some of the report was redacted. Major Forrest F. Parham described the night's events. He said, "Aircraft took off at 2322 Zebra 23, November 53, on an active air defense mission to intercept an unknown aircraft approximately 160 miles northwest of Kinross Air Force Base. The aircraft was under radar control throughout the interception. At approximately 2352 Zebra, the last radio contact was made by the radar station controlling the interception. At approximately 2355 Zebra, the unknown aircraft and the F-89 merged together on the radar scope. Shortly thereafter, the IFF signal disappeared from the radar scope. No further contact was established with the F-89. approximately 16 characters, followed by one whole line of approximately 83 characters including spaces excised. An extensive aerial search has revealed no trace of the aircraft. The aircraft and its crew is still missing. The U.S. Air Force, U.S. Coast Guard, and Canadian Air Force undertook a massive search and rescue mission to find Moncla and Wilson. No sign of any wreckage nor of the pilots was ever found. The U.S. Air Force released a statement regarding the incident. They said that the jet was followed by radar until it merged with an object 70 miles off Cowena Point in Upper Michigan. They then said that the F-89C didn't collide with the C-47, but that something unspecified happened and that the interceptor crashed. This is still the official statement. However, a later statement contradicted this. The second statement said that ground control misread their scope and that the F-89C successfully completed their mission intercepting a UFO. The Air Force identified this UFO as a Dakota, which is a Royal Canadian Air Force C-47 aircraft. The U.S. Air Force said this C-47 was flying 30 miles off course when it was identified on radar. The U.S. Air Force says that Moncla suffered from vertigo and crashed into the lake when returning from the mission. Canadian officials, however, say that no such C-47 flight occurred on that night in that area. The U.S. Air Force couldn't seem to get their story straight with Moncla's widow either. First, they told her that her husband had crashed into the lake, and then they told her that his jet exploded at a high altitude. Project Blue Book was the code name for a U.S. Air Force study of unidentified flying objects headquartered at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It started in March of 1952 and was concluded on December 17, 1969. At the close of Project Blue, all documentation was sent to the National Archives and is currently viewable on microfilm in the National Archives reading room. Between 1947 and 1969, a total of 12,618 UFO sightings were reported to Project Blue Book. Of those sightings, 701 remain unidentified. Project Blue Book has come to a few conclusions. The first is that no UFO ever reported has ever been a threat to the U.S.'s national security. The second conclusion is that there is no evidence any UFO ever reported has technology beyond our current understanding. And the third is that there is no evidence that any unidentified flying object is a vehicle for aliens. Of the Kinross incident, Project Blue Book concluded that Moncla completed his mission, probably suffered from an attack of vertigo, and crashed into the lake. It explained that the abnormal pings that were initially seen were the result of unusual atmospheric conditions, and said that it's understandable that no wreckage was ever recovered given the depth of Lake Superior. Project Blue Book has a term for civilian UFO researchers, calling them civilian saucer groups. Some of these groups believe that Moncla's jet crashed into some sort of UFO protective barrier, or an invisible wall, if you will. Others believe that Moncla and Wilson were abducted by the UFO that they were chasing. The National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomena is a group that does research into unidentified flying objects. They were most active in the U.S. between 1956 and 1980. They say that all mentions of Moncla's mission have been scrubbed from the official record. The Aerospace Technical Intelligence Center makes a similar claim, saying there is no record in the Air Force files of sighting at Kinross Air Force Base on 23 November 1953. There is no case in the files which even closely parallels these circumstances. Through the years, varying information about the jet has come out. In 1958, David Kehoe received a leaked document about the mission. It said, "It seems incredible, but the blip apparently just swallowed our F-89. In 1968, a local newspaper ran a story claiming that pieces of a jet had been found in the lake. This story was never verified, however. In 1968, Adam Jimenez, calling himself a representative of the Great Lakes Diving Company, claimed to have found wreckage from the Kinross incident, along with a metallic object which he said looked like a fragment of a UFO. UFO researchers poked holes in his story, however, proving that the Great Lakes Diving Company didn't exist. After this, Adam Jimenez disappeared. What happened to Felix Moncla and Robert Wilson on the night of November 23, 1953? Did they simply crash into the lake? Did they crash into something in the air? What were they chasing that night? What do you think? If you're listening on Spotify, scroll down and let me know what you think. Thanks for listening to today's episode of That's Ruddy Mysterious. I'm your host, Kelly with an I. If you enjoyed this episode, leave a review and follow That's Ruddy Mysterious to be updated about new episodes. Tune in next Tuesday for another thought-provoking tale.